Welcome to the next one of our soundbites looking at the book of Revelation. And today we're picking up part of John's great interlude about the end, the demise of an anti-Christian world order. We're looking at Revelation chapter 17. But let me read it to you. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters. With her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries." Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a desert. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with the abominable things and filth of her adulteries. This title was written on her forehead: Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. And then the angel said to me, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and will come up out of the abyss and go to his destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because he once was, now is not, and yet will come." This calls for a mind of wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come, but when he does come, he'll remain for a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose, and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will make war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Then the angel said to me, "The waters you saw where the prostitute sits are the peoples, the multitudes, nations and languages. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to give the beast their power to rule until God's words are fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. God our Father, help us understand your word and help us to live in the light of it for Jesus' sake. Amen. Sometimes the pressure of our society seems to exert an irresistible force to erode the standards of faith and morality that we've inherited. Is it worth standing up for biblical truth when it's largely being ridiculed and marginalised? For example, in the 1990s, the previously Anglican-founded Children's Society agreed it had to change its criteria for adoption to allow the possibility of homosexual couples fostering and adopting children through them. Their main reason for doing so was that this is the accepted policy of our secular age and the agency that was involved in fostering and adoption. What else can you do when the government threatens to withdraw your funding unless you follow their new morality? The answer is, ditch your faith, cut your ties to the Anglican Church and go it alone. Well, the truth is, for most of us, that erosion of values is a battle we feel like we've already lost. I mean, take violence or pornography on TV, video or internet. 40 years ago, it was shocking to show anything like nudity on TV. Now, in most films, it's expected. But when was the last time you complained about it? Or even had it bother you? Western churches have become tolerant of things that deep down we know harm us and harm society and harm the church, but we feel like to try and fight it is just a losing battle. We'll just go with the flow. Well, that's exactly the pressures that the churches John is addressing were feeling. See, at the time, the monolithic power of the Roman Empire was requiring them to worship the emperor as God, to accept prostitution as a normal part of society, to tolerate orgies and homosexual practice, to be caught up with the materialistic wealth of the empire. How could Christians, holding different views, hope to make an impact when the empire was so powerful? How could a tiny few, and a load of them slaves at that, take on the might of the most powerful and successful empire the world has ever known? And so it's chapters 17 and 18 that gives us God's response to that and how we are to face those overwhelming powers by warning us against them. Chapter 17, as we look at today, is a wake-up call to watch out for how a godless world might influence us. And chapter 18 describes how God will bring it all in the end, to an end. But first, in chapter 17, we are to recognise the characteristics of a godless society. Remember, in apocalyptic writing, these images we're given are intended to communicate the true characteristics of the things that they stand for. For John's audience and us, secular society may seem to be successful, powerful and unassailable, but that's not how God sees it. So first, this great prostitute, the woman with Babylon, the great mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth tattooed to her forehead, and identified in verse 18 as the great city that rules over the kings of the earth, isn't actually just the one city. It isn't just Rome, although it includes the Roman Empire, not least because famously Rome sits on 7 hills. But the image is not just Babylon equals Rome, because we're told straight away the 7 heads are also 7 rulers. So it's not as simple as just making a geographical reference. This is imagery. Back in chapter 11 verse 18, this city was figuratively called Sodom and Egypt and Jerusalem. Because in a sense what's really going on is the woman represents godless human society, government that refuses to acknowledge the rule of God. That's why in chapter 17 verse 3 she's seated on the beast with the 7 heads and 10 horns, the figure representing satanic influence in this world. Because government that refuses to acknowledge God's sovereign rule is a government ultimately serving the purposes of Satan. That's where it sits in the end. But as usual, while we recognise this principle figuring through the ages, John is giving the picture of the final fulfilment of that history, the point at which godless society reaches its fulfilment prior to the return of Christ. So what are the marks that we're supposed to be wary of as God prepares us for the end? Well, firstly, one mark is the respectability of wealth. When money becomes the way you judge people. Verse 4, the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones and pearls. A godless society is one where wealth buys you power and respectability, and when poverty leaves you marginalised and voiceless. Why is that godless? Because God made all of us in his image. Whether we're wealthy or not, we're to accept each other with joy and respect, value each other's gifts, honour each other's presence. That's the calling of godliness. So when society allows the people with wealth to have more influence over others, it's institutionalising godlessness. Just ask yourself for a moment, who's been behind the move to get pornography and violence more socially acceptable? Isn't it those in the media who knows that sex sells, so they can make more by pushing the boundaries of what's morally acceptable? What's the catchphrase they use? You can't fetter the freedom of the press. You can't censor things. People should be able to make up their own mind. One Christian I read made the point that the church lost the battle for the minds of society when it allowed society's heroes, the actors and actresses of Hollywood, whose wealth and influence people aspire to, when it allowed their serial marriages and adulteries just to be accepted and not abhorred. When we began to make heroes of people whose lives were immoral, we began to undermine the desire to be godly. So first, when wealth becomes respectable and powerful. Secondly, when immorality is accepted. The acceptability of immorality is the second mark to avoid. Verse 4, she held a golden cup in her hands filled with the abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. A godless society is marked not just by the acceptance of immorality. In this image, adultery is not just referring to sexual immorality, but anything that shows unfaithfulness to God. However, throughout the Bible, it's the acceptance of a sexual immorality that's usually the thermometer of general unfaithfulness to God in other areas. Think about all the fertility cults, the Asherah poles, and the other things, the immoralities of the Old Testament. So let me ask, at what stage will the slide into increasing immorality get so bad you think the church should throw all its weight behind opposing it? The Church of England at the moment is going through issues facing the question of gay marriage, something the Bible clearly condemns, but we're still even just debating it. What's worse is the fact that you never even hear the church publicly saying anything that, like sex outside of marriage, is sinful. See, this city, this Babylon, makes immorality acceptable, in fact, even normative. So issues of the respectability of wealth, the acceptability of immorality. And the third trait to mark is the opposition to committed Christianity. If a godless society is comfortably wealthy and tolerant of immorality, John has shown the one thing that will provoke that society to action is committed Christianity. They won't like Christians. Verse 6, I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints, those who bore testimony to Jesus. Verse 13, they have one purpose, they will make war against the Lamb. See, Roman society and our society is remarkably tolerant of all sorts of sexual deviances, moral approaches, diverse religions, and yet when it comes to committed Christians, there's violent opposition to them. Our society is amazingly tolerant of other faiths, alternative lifestyles and practices, and yet when it comes to somebody saying, I'm a committed Christian, that evokes the harshest of lampoons and the most vehement of opposition. And that's because truth makes people uncomfortable. That is, as long as those who bear the truth are still bearing testimony to it. The opposition should not surprise us. John's vision makes it clear that the driving forces behind these shifts is Satan himself. The descriptions in chapter 17 verse 8 makes it clear that the beast is the Antichrist, parodying God by being as a beast, the one who once was, now is not, and yet will come. In chapter verse 8, verse 8b. Although the truth is, verse 8a, that he will come up from the abyss and go to his destruction. In other words, before the final climax of time, the fulfillment of Satan's influence in godless government will come, not under a Roman Empire, alluded to in verses 9 to 10, but in this new world order which precedes the final victory of the Lamb and his followers, verse 14. What John is calling us to do is to realise the seriousness of tolerating a godless society, in making the prejudices of wealth respectable, the growing immorality acceptable, the opposition of committed Christianity normal. Society is not neutral. There is a battle going on for the hearts and minds of people, all ultimately in God's image. And although final victory is being promised, because ultimately, verse 16, the beast, Satan, hates any form of society, so in the end, Satan himself will fight against that woman, that beast. He'll make the attack on the woman. What Satan first tries to corrupt, he ultimately purposes to destroy. So we're warned to watch out then for the influence of godless powers in our culture, lest they infect us and our church, but also because a confrontation with them is coming. And we need to know where we are going to stand on that day. And that's where John takes us next in chapter 18, but more of that next week. In the meantime, let the words of this hymn encourage you as you stand firm in faith in Jesus. Thanks for listening.